Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jason Bomar, your host here at Net.Academy. Today we'll be covering LSAs in Session 4 of Practical OSPF for Network Engineers. As always, if you need to get a hold of me, if you have suggestions, comments, feedback, you can email me or leave a comment down below. If you would like to be notified when we have new content up or available, you can subscribe to the channel and then click the little bell icon. It'll notify you every time that I post content. We try to post content every other week, but there's no guarantee that it will always be on that schedule. Sometimes we'll release a little early. So for the most up-to-date, just go ahead and subscribe and select those notifications. Today we're going to start LSAs. We're going to talk about three types of LSAs, type 1, 2, and 3, or router LSAs, network LSAs, and summary LSAs. As this is a practical look at OSPF, I'm going to focus mostly on type 1 and type 3. We will talk about type 2. Type 2 is a little bit of a special LSA, as we'll see. Let's go ahead and take a look at type 1 LSAs or router LSAs. Router LSAs are generated per area. You can see here in area 6, I start sending these LSAs out. There's one type 1 LSA per router in an area, and it stays within the area. It doesn't go past an ABR. Why are we doing these? We're building these up to build those SPF trees that we talked about in the very first session, right? How does it work? Well, something like R1 is going to send out a single type 1 LSA for every OSPF network that is configured directly on it. And it's going to send its cost for each of those networks. And it will send such an update to R2 and to R3. Likewise, R2 will do the same, sending it to R1 and R3. R3 will send it to R1 and R2. And likewise, we do this per area. So it's always important to remember that we build that Dijkstra tree on a per area basis, not between areas, right? For area 6 to get to area 12, it has to do so by going through an ABR like R3. And so we're building these so that we understand how to get to the ABR and how to get to our intra-area networks. And remember, there's a single type 1 LSA per router. Advertised to all of the links and neighbors within an area. Let's talk about type 2s. Type 2 LSAs are specific to a DR-BDR type item. And you can see what ends up happening is all of my routers are sending their type 1s, but they're only going to the DR, right? That includes, by the way, my BDR, R2 in this case, right? So my BDR also sends its type 1 LSA over to R1. So R1's getting all of these type 1s. It takes and kind of sends up a single type 2 to his upstream neighbor, right? You'll note that R2 is not doing that. That's because it's the backup designated router. If it takes over in the election, then it will also send up a single type 2 to its neighbor. So this is kind of in keeping with that broadcast domain configuration. I'm not going to spend as much time on this one because, as mentioned before, we don't see broadcast networks like this as frequently as we did, or I should say, not in this configuration. We use a lot of point-to-point networks that end up being broadcast. However, if you go back to the first session, you'll note I recommend we change those to point-to-points and not have that DR-BDR election. Let's talk about the worst named LSA of all time, the type 3 LSA or the summary LSA. These are a little bit weird. We have our type 1s that are going back and forth, for example. And then we take the information in an area, like in area 6, for example, and we effectively, they call it a summary LSA because it's kind of summarizing area 6 for area 0. And it's telling area 0, hey, here's all the things I know about in area 6. And so the type 3 LSAs are generated on our ABRs. They're always going to be generated on our ABRs. And so however many, and remember that in type 1s and type 2s, I'm sending a single LSA for all my networks that might be included. Type 3s, the opposite of that. In a way, it's the opposite of summarizing. If you think about it, like I said, I think it's the worst named LSA. However, that's what it's called. I tend to think of them just as type 3s, if I'm honest with you. It will generate a single type 3 per network that it knows about in the area. So if I had, for example, 2 networks on R1, 2 on R2, and 2 on R3 that were in Area 6 for a grand total of 6 networks in Area 6, then I would send 6 Type 3 LSAs into Area 0. Now, these LSA Type 3s, they can go beyond ABRs. They're generated on ABRs. They're meant to go beyond ABRs, right? But now we're no longer building that topology map. Remember, Area 0 does not build a full topology for Area 6, nor does it build a full topology for Area 12, right? Instead, it says, what's the information that resides in Area 6? Oh, it's these 6 networks. I'll just go to the ABR for Area 6 to get to any of those. That's kind of what we mean by summary, right? It's the ABR is summarizing what's available in an area, but it's doing it on a per network basis. It's a one-to-one mapping. If I have 100 unique network statements in Area 6, I will have 100 unique Type 3 LSAs, 1 per. This is important because we can start to see now how we might do filtering, right? We're going to do it on the ABR. Probably that's pretty obvious. Let's have a quick recap. This is a shorter session, but these are important topics, right? Type 1 is a very common type of LSA, and type 2, which is a less common LSA because it's only in those DR, BDR type networks. These define your intra-area routes. Type 1s and type 2s determine what is within an area. What am I going to run my Dijkstra algorithm against to build my shortest path tree? Type 3s, again, very common. These define my inter-area routes. How do I get to the overall entirety of the autonomous system? Right? And you can now start to see how things like stubs and total stubs might work, right? In a way, it's LSA filtering. It's not, but in a way it is, right? Remember that for a type 1, there's a single LSA for all of those prefixes on each router. And then for type 3, there's 1 LSA per prefix, right? And again, when we think about, 1 LSA per prefix, I can start to see how route filtering might be done as well, right? Now, you might say if there's only 1 LSA per prefix, what about things like route summarization? And here's, again, when we talk about summarization, you would think a type 3, a summary LSA, would mean that's how I'm doing summarization, but it's not. Instead, I would generate a type 3 that covers the summary range. And indeed, we can do summarization at ABRs and at ASBRs. We'll cover that in a later session. We'll go through some more advanced OSPF stuff, maybe 3-4 sessions from now. But these are all really critical components, right? Type 1, very common. Type 2, less common, but it's important to know about those type 2s. Type 3s, really common, and type 3s are really important because type 3s are what are building the entirety of your autonomous system. Type 1s and type 2s are what are building the entirety of your intra-area routes, right? Inter-area routes. Intra-area routes. That's correct. Type 1s and type 2s are building your intra-area routes. Type 3s are your inter-area routes, which means the entirety of your autonomous system. Hopefully that made sense. I want to thank you for joining us today at Net.Academy, and hopefully you got something out of it. Please feel free to reach out.
Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.